Hey, Pawn family, welcome back to another awesome episode of the Pawn Leaders Podcast. Thank you so much. For those of you who haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. It lets you know exactly when a new episode comes out. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and leave a review. Also, don't forget to join us in the Pawn Leaders Podcast community, where we talk about the episodes, we ask questions, talk about leadership and culture, and the pawn world. With me, I have somebody who is extremely involved in the pawn world and the pawn community. With me, I have Greg Engstrom, who's been in the pawn business since 1986 with his stores at Ameripawn. He is the president of the Indiana Pawnbrokers Association and put on an incredible Midwest Pawn Conference that I went to and spoke at. He was also on the board of the MPA for 11 years, the winner of Pawnbroker of the Year in 2016, and just a couple of little tidbits of information. He flew a plane, so was a pilot, a scuba diver, and a mountain climber. Greg, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Yigal. It's my pleasure and my honor to be in your presence.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Actually, I should be saying the same thing because, again, I ask people who should be on the show, and Greg came up so much. That's why I've been hounding you to get on here. So thank you for being on.
Well, again, it's my honor. I'm quite a devoted pawnbroker.
Nice. So let's talk about, 1986 rolls around. You open your first store. How did you get into the pawn business?
So it's I can't really take credit for it. A matter of fact, in my career and in my life, all the good ideas and good moves and decisions I've made are somebody else's.
Okay.
So I actually had a jewelry store prior to ever thinking about the pawn business. And my manager at the time had worked in a pawn shop, and he says, "Hey, we need to open a pawn shop." I said, "No, you're crazy. Not in this town. They would never let it happen." So we applied, and here came the license in the mail. Getting a pawn license in Indiana at that time was rather involved. However, because I already had the jewelry store, we already bought secondhand goods, had relations with banks, had relations with the police department, and had a reputation in the community. It was a piece of cake to get our first license. And actually, we got the license in '85, but it was such a surprise that we were not ready. And we ended up not opening the store until '86.
Oh, wow.
So Ben and I, we put this thing together, and Ben didn't really want to be a partner because starting a new business, you have no sure income. So he wanted to be sure he had his salary and so forth. So that started kind of a long career. Ben worked for me a total of 32 years before he retired in 2015, I think, 2016 maybe.
Wow.
Right in there.
That's amazing. So you guys, he gave you the idea, you opened up the shop, and then when was it that you went from one store to the second store?
So we rented a small store in '86, and the business grew rapidly, and we needed space. We needed it bad. So we ended up buying a building one store away, one building away, which we still occupy, in 1989. Much bigger. We have 10,000 square feet and sitting on 2 acres and our own parking. And actually, I'm talking to you from the office building we added in the back a few years ago. So that's grown. And then we opened our second store in 1992. Let's see. No, that's not right. LaPorte, we opened in 1990, then Lake Station 1992. And I also had stores in Crown Point that I opened and closed, and Hammond. And I had one inside a flea market for about 6 months. That's kind of tough because you're only open 3 days. So at the same time, we had a jewelry store, and added a second jewelry store and another pawn shop in Michigan City. And so now, kind of come full circle. and have divested of those other retail stores and just have the 3 pawn shops now.
Nice. So you were growing, and then you just said, I just want the 3 stores. Either ones didn't work or it was just too much, correct?
Well, a lot of things. And, something that was a life changer for me, I got remarried a few years ago, and my wife's a nurse, and actually a cardiac nurse. And her first husband had died from kind of a unusual and rare heart condition, and at a young age, of course. And so we were married about 3 weeks, and we're driving somewhere, and I said, oh, my left arm was hurting. I said, when I hang it out the window, I get that pain. And well, you know how nurses are. So she asked me more and more questions, and I'm like, oh boy, here we go. So anyway, make a long story short, I end up in the cardiologist's office the next morning. He does his thing. He gives me a cup of coffee. How you feeling? I said, I feel fine. He says, well, let's run some tests. He says, I'll meet you at the hospital. I said, all right, when are we going to do that? He says, well, I'll meet you there in about an hour. I said, well, why don't we schedule it so I can, get it on my calendar? He says, well, let's just go get it done. All right. So we went to the hospital, run on the treadmill. Man, I rocked and rolled on that treadmill. They my butt, but hey, I did it. And, they inject this glow-in-the-dark stuff in your veins and put you in a machine and all that. And I said, oh, that was kind of fun, Joe. Now what? He says, well, come with me. So this is a brand new hospital, and I get to see the inner workings. I was kind of excited because I'd never been in there, and everything being new in this monstrous hospital. So we end up at the doctor's desk in the center of something, with all this activity, and he's writing out this stuff. And he says, all right, they'll have a room for you. I said, well, when's that? He says, well, tonight. Well, wait, I've got an appointment in the morning and a few things. He says, nah, we got to do something. So anyway, wanted to do an angiogram in the morning. All right, I guess, so this is the real game changer. So that night, my 2 boys come in and the other, her children, and everybody's kind of in shock because, I'm not overweight and I've been pretty active and maybe a lot of stress and high blood pressure, that sort of thing. But one of the, all the procedures, of course, I'm hooked up to every computer known to man, and, they're taking my blood pressure every time I tend to fall asleep. And so the nurse came in with this scale, and she says, Mr. Engstrom, can you get up on this scale? And I'm like, well, of course I can. All the wires and everything, I stand up, I get on the scale. This other nurse comes in, and they're having a quick conversation, and I, whatever. And half hour later, nurse comes in and says, Mr. Engstrom, you are not allowed to get out of bed tonight. Here's a bedpan. I'm like, whoa, hold on. No, I got stuff. This is not happening, I'm not having a heart attack or anything like that. I just had some pain. So next morning, of course, guess what? I learned how to use a bedpan. That's a life changer, believe me. So anyway, the next morning they come in with the gurney to take me down to the, I don't know, whatever room it is in the basement, not the morgue, but the,
thank God.
Yeah. So anyway, they hooked me up to this portable monitor. Now my wife is there and she knows what all this stuff is, and she knows all the lingo, which I know none of it. And they're talking or whatever, and the nurse says, Mr. Engstrom, can you get up on the gurney? And I said, yeah, I can. So I hop right up there, no problem. And they're talking about this little screen and a little blip and whatever. And man, we're on our way. We are moving. We're down to the end of the hall. We're down to the basement. We're in the thing. Put this under your tongue, and So the end of it is that I was so close to having a heart attack that when I got out of bed to get on the gurney, it was starting.
Wow.
Right there. So fortunately, being right there, they were able to stop it before any heart damage and so forth. But it's kind of a game changer because after an event, it's like your life flashes before you for a second. Things that used to be really important are not as important anymore. And the things that were kind of second best are now very important. So that's how we went from growing this empire to no end in sight to, you know, I bought a boat, we bought a farm, you know, we got rid of a lot of the stress, a lot of the stores, and now life is just fantastic. This is
That's an incredible story. I know that, you know, we talked about that at Midwest, and it's a feeling of mine, and tell me if you agree, that a lot of pawnbrokers are highly stressed out.
yeah. So the high blood pressure thing. At one point, they said I had high blood pressure for 10 years, and I said that's not possible because I go to the doctor and it was always low. And so eventually they said, you need to get a blood pressure thing and take it to the office. Yeah, guess what? When I'm in the office, my blood pressure is high.
Wow.
When I'm sitting in the waiting room looking at 3-month-old magazines, my blood pressure is low. So yeah, pawnbroking is kind of a unique business. You really have to be driven because, you look at a truck driver and he's shifting into a dozen different gears every time he comes to a stop sign. As a pawnbroker, we have to shift a lot of gears from sales to buying to negotiating to damage control to public relations, all these different hats. And you have to flip them around quickly. So it's actually, for most pawnbrokers I know, it's actually kind of a high to go from buying a diamond ring for $2,000 to shaking hands with a senator and then having dinner with your wife. All these different things. I don't know if it's a natural chemical reaction or whatever, but it's very uplifting.
So what would you do differently? I mean, looking back at the moment where you almost had that near heart attack and knowing that you were growing this empire, and what would you have done differently when it comes to that stress to be able to either monitor it or not have that high? Because I'll never forget, somebody told me in the pawn industry, they say, I work better when I have more stress. That was like word for word. So what would you have done differently if there's a young pawnbroker out there listening, growing his empire or her empire, like many want to? What advice would you give them to not have that much stress during this?
That's a hard thing because I think whoever told you that they worked better under stress than not has to be my twin. I've always felt that when things were the toughest, I was the most capable. And it's easy, if that's your thing, which was my thing, to just put on a little more every day. I'll do this project, I'll do that, we'll expand that, we'll do this over here. The problem is that that's a good thing, I think. You want to paint a store and it's a project and you get it done, and then you want to add another showcase of jewelry, and then you want to advertise in a new thing. I think that is good. And I think that's the big driver, is that kind of stress. The issue is the underlying stress. And that is the employee that's out of line that maybe you need to talk to that you haven't. So that's hanging on. Some unfinished project, some phone call you haven't made, all these underlying things as you're jumping from this hat or this gear to the next project and back and forth. There's a lot of underlying stress. And I think that's what us as pawnbrokers and any business people need to watch, because that's kind of the killer. And along with the underlying stress is guilt. I missed my kid's baseball game. That eats at every parent.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
So I guess the part is that I would say is, as much as possible, take the dustpan and dust up all that underlying stress. You missed your kid's game, make sure you're at the next one and take him for ice cream or her, kind of do that extra. But I think the cleanup of that underlying stress is what a lot of us skip, and just live with.
That's I love it. That's such great advice, and I couldn't agree with you more. I also remember my time as a pawnbroker. You know, there's two things that come to mind when you talk about that. One is I was having a conversation on a strategy call with somebody, and they just kept on repeating like that they feel alone. And so I think that the feeling of the pawn business is so different than all other businesses that nobody understands us.
Well,
And
yeah, that's very true. That's you know what, and that's you mentioned the Midwest Pawn Convention, and of course the national convention's right around the corner. I have, and as you mentioned, maybe somebody's mentioned my name more than once. I have more friends more than 100 miles away from me than I have inside my little circle of
yeah,
100 miles. I pawnbrokers from all over, and we communicate all the time. There was a little thing going on the internet today. Somebody had a rosary for sale, and so Tom Stout from Wisconsin makes an offer. I make an offer. Then Jamie Smith from Iowa makes, and so we're bidding against each other. And the person who had it for sale, the store that had it for sale, thought there was an ugly fight going on. Indiana and Iowa, but we're like best of friends. And, we're kind of pinching each other, but you can't see it when it's just typed out on the internet. But yeah, the cohesiveness of pawnbrokers is like none other. We can't talk to normal business people or, people that have regular jobs, if you want to call it that, because our world is so different.
Yeah. There's also one more thing that, you said that we all wear so many hats. And in today's with technology and the internet, you can hire out so many things for a fraction of the cost. You can hire an accountant, a bookkeeper, a CFO, a marketing manager, somebody to make your website at the fraction of the cost that it would be to hire somebody full time. So I think now more than ever, we as pawnbrokers have the opportunity to give off and delegate those tasks to other people and concentrate on growing, the pawn balance, our sales, the culture of the business, which I think is super important.
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast that you did with, I think, the keynote speaker at the National
Yeah,
about,
Joey Coleman.
the customer retention. And that was really kind of an eye-opener because, well, the two things. First one was the amount of customers banks lose on a regular basis is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I think pawnbroker customers are more loyal than bank customers, but he's right. We spend a lot of energy and money marketing to a new customer when we probably should concentrate a little more on the current customer. But I think, most pawnbrokers I know and most stores I've been in, they do a darn good job of, calling people by name, and they know what they want, and helping them out. And very few pawn shops that I have been in, and I should clarify that. My friends' pawn shops that I've been in, that is generally the case. I've been in pawn shops where I don't know the person when I'm traveling. Of course, I hit all the local pawn shops, and I do see that in some places. And I wonder how does that work? How do they, if you're not saying hello to people and you're not keeping the cases halfway clean, how do you survive? And like you say, with the world's getting smaller, it's a good investment to keep your customers the best you can.
So let's get into that. Let's get into, you were board of the NPA for 11 years, current president of the Indiana Pawnbrokers. You won the Pawnbroker of the Year in 2016, which I think is an incredible award for a pawnbroker to win. In today's pawn market, with everything that you're seeing, what does it take for a pawnbroker to be successful? And what does it take for a pawnbroker? What mistakes do you see pawnbrokers are making that if somebody's listening to this, you can say, please, right away, change these things so that your business can improve?
So the first thing I will say is, looking at where we're at economically and where the pawn business is in a cycle. So just a few years ago, it was easy to be a pawnbroker. You could make a lot of mistakes because the money was in the gold. And of course, with everything we do, it's all about volume. It's not the price of gold. It's not the price of cell phones. It's the volume. So business was incredible in 2010, 11, 12. And as that part of the industry has slowed down, it's gotten back to where I was in the 1990s being a pawnbroker. So what I'm saying is you have to do all these different things. You have to provide good service. You have to keep the shelves clean. You've got to buy. You've got to sell. You've got to loan money. You've got to retain customers. It's more pawnbroking today than it was 5 or 6 years ago. You could call yourself a pawnbroker, but you didn't really have to be a pawnbroker. You know, the thing is, and I've met with a lot of politicians and testified in Senate hearings and House hearings here in Indiana. And one of the things that I believe in real strongly, and it's an uncomfortable topic of what pawnbrokers do. And what I'm saying is, who's our customer? Now, we always say generally the underemployed, seasonally employed, people that just aren't very good with their money, they're our customer, along with people who have a lot of money, but something bad happens, or they have a good job. You know, they get divorced, they get sued, they lose their job, whatever. But let's talk about the customers that we serve, nobody else will. These are the alcoholics, the druggies, the convicted felons. These are, wife beaters and all these kind of things that nobody wants to talk about. And because it's uncomfortable, but as pawnbrokers, we all deal with them. We all give them access to some money. It's an easy loan. Now if they're a thief and they're stealing stuff, that's a different animal. I'm not putting them in this group at all. I'm talking about people that really need money, and there's nobody else that's going to take care of them. So what I've seen is pawnbrokers that shy away from these people. They don't want to deal with them. They're a pain. They're loud. They're smelly. Their stuff is always junk, and a lot of excuses. Man, these people need us, and quite frankly, we need them.
Yep.
We need to provide liquidity to those people that have nowhere else to turn. And it's kind of a hard thing to tell to a politician. It's scary. It's like, the first time somebody admits that they have an addiction, or they, whatever bad things are in their history. But this is not a bad thing. This is what we do and who we help. Of course, we help all the other people, but we're helping a group of people nobody else will touch. And I really am passionate about, that's what pawnbroking is about. And I see, if you're asking me what I would tell a pawnbroker to stop doing, is ignoring those people. Granted, it's hard to make money on a $5 loan. People that are stinky sometimes scare away other customers. But these are people, they need us, and that's what our sign is for. That's what we do.
And you said it the best. You said these are people, and they need
Right.
help sometimes as well. It's not always going to be to do more drugs and alcohol, but it's going to be to pay for a bill, or to send money to somebody that needs it, whatever that is. So I love, no one's ever said that in my 16 years of pawnbroking, owning my stores, and my third generation mentality. But so I thank you for bringing that up. That's pretty cool.
It's an uncomfortable topic though, isn't it?
Well, 100%, because you don't want to tell people that that's the customer base that you have. You want this image of, I'm serving this type of customer, and I'm helping the community, but those guys I'm not touching. But the truth is that we do.
Yes.
Even if they don't walk in stinky, right? They can walk in and be perfectly okay and take it to drown their sorrows because of some traumatic event that happened, whatever that is.
Yeah, everybody's got a story, but I do draw the line at thieves.
Yeah.
Those are, we kind of don't like those, and we will cut them off.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that we're as pawnbrokers, we're within the community, and it's our responsibility not just to sit there and think about making money, but how we help the community. Because when that happens, when the community starts believing in us, that's when we make money. That's when the clients start coming in. That's when, unlike the banks, we don't lose as many clients so often.
Right. And, if you don't mind me shifting directions just a touch, talking about politicians and politics, I put a post on Pawn Chat a while back, and it was probably in March. And I asked the pawnbrokers to be sure that they have their pawn continuity insurance taken care of before, I forget what date I put. And like everybody's asking, even insurance agents that are on the channel, what are you talking about? What is pawn continuity insurance? And I said, well, I had to admit that I made it up. But what it is, and it's actually pretty important in my opinion, is there is one group of people who can put you out of business with a pen while wearing a suit. And that is our civic leaders and our congressional leaders. So the point is that was right before the primary. And, I'm amazed talking to some pawnbrokers. I say, how much insurance do you pay, for your business and your building and your inventory and your customers' inventory? Oh, it's thousands of dollars. Well, how much do you pay to ensure that something doesn't happen to your ability to do what you do? You mean like what? So you go to a chili supper. You donate to a campaign. You donate to a nonprofit which may have some political affiliations. Get to know your politicians, and so few of them, we feel stigmatized because we're pawnbrokers. It's almost like if we were some other kind of minority, how other people feel, and so they're a lot of times afraid to talk to politicians, afraid to go to city council meetings. But I can tell you, and I'll give you one war story. Because I've been the president of Indiana, been very active in our state legislature for several years. And I found that when you need a politician, when there's a bill on the table, when there's something going on, it's too late to call your senator and say, hey, my name is Yigal, and I'm a pawnbroker, and I need your help. Not to say that they won't do anything, because naturally they're serving and they will help to whatever degree they can or feel they should. However, if you're their friend and you can call up and say, hey, this is Greg. Hey, what's with this bill Senator so-and-so put up? That brings it to a whole different level. And I'm not talking about spending thousands of dollars like we do on our regular insurance. I'm talking about a few $100s here and there, each election. You support a couple people, you send them checks, you go to the chili supper. Don't ask for anything. You're just going to meet them, say, hi, I'm Greg, I'm a pawnbroker. I own the pawn shop at the top of the hill. And without a doubt, they're going to say, well, what do you do? What is a pawn shop? And there's your opportunity. And as you develop that over a period of years, believe me, one chili supper is not going to make you best friends, as we know. But over time, as you build this relationship, you're going to find that their friends are other politicians. And so it's easier to grow that list of friends you have. And if something comes up, then you can say, hey, what's going on with this? So there was let me tell you my story. So in Indianapolis, our state capital, Indiana is a part-time legislator state. In other words, the legislature only meets 3 months. The rest of the year, people have other jobs. So they're not full-time, which they are, I think, in many states. But regardless, so we were dealing with several bills in Indiana. We actually, and I'm not going to say we got passed because there's always many players, but we helped eliminate the sales tax on gold and silver bullion. We eliminated the 80-year ban on loaning money on handguns in Indiana.
Wow.
And also helped pass legislation, excuse me, that no longer allows these gold buyers to set up at the hotels with the full-page ads. It's no longer legal in Indiana. So had quite a bit of experience down there in meeting these people. And you know what? They're just like you and I. They're just like a pawnbroker. They're wearing a little better suit because pawnbrokers can't afford to wear a suit because you get ruined. They have 2 feet just like we do. So anyway, they're as happens in other states, a bill comes up. This is last legislative season, and it was about pawnbroking. And the senator that wrote the bill is former FBI and a former state policeman, so he's got some experience there. But the bill he wrote, essentially, to shorten it right down to a nub, it would say that if I filed a police report on my stolen camera, I could take a copy of that to the pawn shop, give it to them, and take my camera home.
Craziness.
Yeah. So, we forget about due process and everything else. So, anyway, I called the senator's office, left messages, so forth and so on, kind of went round and around and wasn't able to. I actually was in Indianapolis and went to his office and got to speak with his assistant, who just made an appointment, for at a later date. Anyway, I'm sitting here in my office, just like I am today. Phone rings. It's another senator who I barely know, but I know through somebody else who he is. And he says, "Hey, you're president of the Indiana Pawnbrokers." I said, "Yes." He says, "What do you think of this Senate bill, whatever the number was?" And I said, "Sorry about that. I thought I turned that."
You're a pawnbroker, no problem.
So he said, "What do you think of this bill?" He says, "What's your stand on it?" And I says, "Well, in its current form, I have to be opposed to it. Have you reached out to the senator?" I said, "Yes, I have. And a matter of fact, I have a meeting with his staffer next week." He says, "All right, here's the deal." He says, "That bill is in my committee. It will not get a hearing unless you call me and tell me otherwise." So, in other words, because of this relationship that the Indiana Pawnbrokers has with a few senators and representatives, we stand up there a little bit, and we actually got this call. "What do you think?" And this bill was dead.
That's amazing. So you have to get involved. You have to know who the politicians are who can, like you said, sign away your business.
Yeah, and one other quick one is in the process of getting the 80-year ban on handgun loans in Indiana eliminated. We had worked at that. Steve Krupnick, my predecessor, who was president of Indiana and also is a pawnbroker of the year many years ago, kept trying to get this thing going, but we had trouble. And I put out in our pawn community, "I'm working on this. Anybody have any contacts?" And a pawnbroker from Bonnie Lake, Washington said, "Hey, I've got the cell phone number of a guy at the NRA." So unbelievable. I'd called the NRA office in Washington, D.C. You kind of know where those calls go.
Yeah.
And I got a hold of this guy and I told him what we're doing. He says, good, you're going to be in Indianapolis tomorrow. And I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I will be. Why? He says, because I'll be there and let's sit down and talk.
Amazing.
And that started the whole, so we actually got the backing of the NRA from another pawnbroker put that together. It was awesome. So the political thing, it's like sausage, you may like it, you may not like it, but you sure don't want to watch it going on.
I think it's imperative that if you're a pawnbroker and you believe that everyone else is going to do it for you, you're wrong. You need to get involved. And I think it's what's made you successful. Am I right? Like being involved, going to these, to the MPA, going, holding the Midwest conferences, the conventions, and being the president and leading and seeing what you want for your business and seeing that through the government and politics, because we have to. That's how our business works. So,
right. And yeah, and the side bonus to being involved politically is that politicians also know a lot of other people. So if somebody has, a firearms collection they're looking to liquidate, you might get a phone call. Hey, this is Senator so-and-so. My buddy's looking to sell his guns. Yeah. And it's happened. Absolutely.
Greg, let me ask you this question. And with this question, we'll go ahead and wrap up the interview. You've been around the block. You've seen the pawn industry. You've seen the gold prices go up, pawn industry change. From many stores to only 3 stores, from the MPA to Indiana. There's a lot of young pawnbrokers listening to this, and they're thinking to themselves, this isn't the same business that my father, my mother, or the other people ran back in the day. From your experience, what can you tell them to make the experience better, as well as to not worry as much? Because some of them are worried that, some of them want to get out. Some of them want to say it's not the same business. Like you said you used to just open the doors and money would come in. So what can you tell the young pawnbrokers listening to this?
So the pawn business is something that, I started out in the jewelry business and absolutely fell in love with the pawn business. And I am one of the pawn shop's best customers. And if you are a pawnbroker, you have 20% of the items in your possession still have a price tag on them, right? So that's a true pawnbroker has got stuff at home. The TV still has a price sticker on it. But here's the thing. As a pawnbroker, you can change like a chameleon, except for one thing. The one thing a pawnbroker can't change is you loan money to people who need it. Everything else you can change. You can say, I want to cash money orders, or I want to cash checks. I want to become a UPS store. I want to do all these other things and other services that you can add to your business and change. There was times when Beanie Babies were super hot. Well, yeah. The pawnbroker, you can be in the Beanie Baby business, but the core, what keeps the business going, is the loans. So keep the core the same. You're loaning money to people who need it. And then all the other things you can change on a dime. You can, I see a lot of pawnbrokers getting more and more into collector coins. While that's hot, you can roll with it. If that's no longer hot and say Beanie Babies comes back, you just scoot the coins over, put the Beanie Babies in, baseball cards. But we can move around and we can do a lot of different things in our store. The important thing is, and I told my banker this years ago, we walked around the store and I said, see the stuff in the back room? He says, yeah, a lot of stuff back here. I says, it's all moving. It's all rattling, and there's money falling out of every piece back here. Not a lot, nickels, dimes, pennies, but it's all falling to the floor. And once a month, we just sweep it all up. That's the core. So then build around that core.
Love it. And I'll add that I'll never forget, I wasn't too much of a proud pawnbroker in the beginning. And it wasn't until a little old lady came up to me and hugged me and said, Mijo, you know, you might not understand how important you guys are to the community, but because of you guys, people get to work, babies have, you know, Pampers, we have money to keep the lights on. And that shifted my mindset. Like the core is lending money, but like you said, to people who need it. And when we believe that, you know, some pawnbrokers are a little bit ashamed, but be a proud pawnbroker. You know, be proud the fact that we're helping people and the community to pay their bills, to get through difficult situations, because without us, I don't know what they would do. So,
Right. I mean, a pawnbroker is the only one in a community who will give a person money when they need it, regardless if they ever paid us back, regardless if they've never paid their water bill. As long as they're not a thief, we're their place.
yep. Love it. Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. And if you guys haven't gone to the Midwest Pawn Convention, you don't have to be from the Midwest. Like you learn something at all these conventions. And I believe that, especially in today's pawnbroking world, we can't get enough of learning more tactics and strategies and just meeting other people like us. You know, I got to meet a lot of people at the conference, which was very, very well done. So check out the Midwest Pawn Convention next year, which is going to be held where? You guys know yet?
Yeah, it'll be in Louisville. It'll be in May. I think it's about the first or second weekend in May.
Perfect. And so, Greg, once again, thank you very much. Pawn family, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and go to pawnleaders.com if you want to have a chat with me about anything you need for your pawn business. Greg, thank you again. I appreciated you having on the show and listening to what you have to say.
Thank you. My honor. My pleasure.